Hi, with Julian on the brown note and Anthony Albanese versus negative gearing versus the Sydney Morning Herald. For some reason, I've probably made more posts on Australian issues about housing inaffordability in one form or another than I have about anything, well, maybe not Scott Morrison. Housing inaffordability and rent inaffordability in Australia is the cost of living crisis. It's the thing that reduces the amount of disposable income that Australians have. There's no cost of living crisis when your rent is cheap or when your housing is cheap. When you push it to the extreme of milking your slave renters or even people who own one home to the extent that they have, you're going to have a cost of living crisis no matter what the winds of the global economy is, because people haven't got any bloody money. And it's always gone back to the Howard years about how, like Margaret Thatcher in the UK, he reshaped the entire life of Australia that ended up with future people and the entire generation being shut out of the gold standard of every capitalist society: owning your own home, accumulating your wealth and passing it on, and growing economically into giving it all to somebody else's rental property. So they've got two properties and you've got none, and you end up with nothing at the end of it. And this came about through Howard's distortion and implementation of superannuation tax breaks for people that already had over $1 million in super, franking credits which started off at I think $500,000 a year and are now $10 billion a year for people who haven't paid tax to receive tax rebates, and negative gearing, which makes it better to own multiple properties than to own none for some reason that nobody can work out. All of this has generated an enormous amount of wealth that has been pumped back into the property market, seeing it dramatically increase to the point where only people that do own properties are able to bid for the new ones and everyone else is paying off their mortgage. I did a piece a while ago on housing inaffordability, and I think the figures were something like in 1997, when John Howard came to office, it was about 6 times the average wage in Sydney to own the average price 3-bedroomed house. By 2007, when he'd just left office, it had gone up to 10 times the average wage. By 2017, it had gone up to 16 times the average wage, I think second in the world only to Hong Kong, the number one most inaffordable housing market based on the average wage, and now it's over 18 times. So in that period of the lowest wages growth for half a century, housing has gone from 6 times the average wage to over 18 times the average wage. There is no possibility of anyone keeping up with anything other than housing and the increase in housing value each year. Now, we have weaponized the investment property in this country so that we now have this incredible 2-tier society. And Bill Shorten, when he faced Scott Morrison 2 elections ago, tried to tackle franking credits, negative gearing, and the superannuation tax breaks, and the media turned on him so bad. And Anthony Albanese has now come out and done the one thing that Labour have to do for the good of the country, which is address these issues. And he said he's addressing negative gearing, and the usual suspects like the Sydney Morning Herald have come out to batter him straight away. Now, this country was prepared to let a scumbag like Scott Morrison, who had presided over a Liberal government that had already burned through 2 prime ministers and overseen an incredible decline in the economic fortunes of Australia, the media in this country were prepared to let that happen rather than Bill Shorten come in and address genuine economic reform. They are our enemy. They will do anything to protect this delicious money, even if it means someone like Scott Morrison, or in the UK, Boris Johnson and Brexit. They would rather that than allow Jeremy Corbyn in to actually deal with economic unfairness. The number one thing that any government should be dealing with. Now, in this country, we've got no escape from this media doing this. As soon as Albanese came out and said that he was going to address negative gearing, there were multiple stories in the Sydney Morning Herald defending negative gearing. And there will be multiple stories all the way up to the next election saying about how many old age pensioners are going to lose their pension because they've got this investment property. But that's not the real scenario here, is it? Will the public fall for this again? Like, you fell for it so bad. How stupid were you to fall for it that time? It's like Australia thinks of themselves in the classic term of temporarily inconvenienced millionaires. Or maybe we all think that one day Elon Musk will invite us to a hot chick Lamborghini party, because we're all going back to defend these Gina Rineharts without being asked over and over again. How stupid are we? We will be bombarded between now and the next election with stories about an old lady who owns one investment property and can't afford to live. Well, the truth of the matter is that 25% of all rental properties in Australia are owned by 1% of the population, and they all benefit from negative gearing. Albanese probably can't even remove negative gearing for every investment property, but if he does it for every second investment property, how will the public reject that? Most people don't own more than 2 houses. But we should be getting rid of it entirely. It unfairly weights the economy so that housing becomes less and less affordable. Housing just isn't about owning a home. Housing is about you not giving all of your life's money to someone else's children. Housing is about you accumulating your life's wages in a property. It's a bank account that you have, and that $800 a week you've got stays with you. You lose the interest, but you gain more as the property value goes up over time. And now all we're doing is funding extra properties for people who benefited when times were good. They had a woman on ABC radio who was decrying Albanese going after negative gearing. She was saying that it would make her sell her own properties and that rents would go up. So they asked her how many she owned. 15. Now that's 15 properties she might have to sell that would go back onto the market, that people who might actually want to live in one home they own could buy and not turn up to an auction and be outbidded by someone that already has 3 properties because they've got the collateral to outbid them. So what will you do in the next election? Are you going to fall for this shit again? Are you going to continue to vote to kick yourself in the face? Or are you going to support Anthony Albanese in tackling negative gearing?